Welcome to Avoidant Decoded. If you're ready to understand your worth on a deeper level and break free from patterns that no longer serve you, you're in the right place. Consider becoming a member of the channel to support this journey and gain access to more powerful insights designed to help you grow, heal, and reconnect with yourself. You probably feel like they've completely moved on, right? You check your phone more than you want to admit, hoping for something, anything, a message, a missed call, a small sign that you still exist in their world. But nothing shows up, and slowly your mind starts filling in the silence with painful thoughts. Maybe I didn't matter that much. Maybe they don't even notice I'm gone. But there's something important you need to understand. Silence doesn't always mean the absence of feeling. For someone with avoidant tendencies, silence can actually be where their emotions become the loudest. While you're holding yourself back from reaching out, they might be dealing with something far more uncomfortable, your absence, without the ability to control the distance anymore. You didn't choose no contact because you stopped caring. You chose it because you were drained from feeling invisible, unheard, and emotionally disconnected in something that once meant everything to you. And now one question keeps circling in your mind. Do they even realize I'm gone? The truth is, they usually notice more than you think. They just process it differently. When you go silent, you're not just removing yourself physically. You're also taking away the emotional space they used to rely on, the space where they could retreat, pull back, or avoid facing difficult feelings. From your side, their silence can feel like rejection, like proof that it never meant anything. But what you don't see is what's happening inside them. While you're looking for answers on your screen, they may be replaying memories in their own mind. You didn't just disappear, your presence shifted from something outside of them to something they now carry internally. They often don't think about the big, dramatic moments. Instead, it's the quiet ones that stay, the times you were patient, the moments you stayed emotionally present without pressure, the way you offered warmth without expecting anything in return. They remember how you saw them when they weren't trying to protect themselves. They remember how you didn't force them, didn't push them into corners they weren't ready for. Those small, seemingly ordinary moments are the ones that leave the deepest mark. What lingers isn't just the memory of you as a person, it's how they felt around you, something unfamiliar, something they didn't fully understand when you were there. And now that you're gone, that feeling doesn't just disappear, it stays with them in a way they can't easily escape. But this is where it gets confusing. Even if they miss you, they might not show it. For an avoidant person, expressing emotions can feel like exposing something fragile. And that vulnerability feels risky. It opens the door to rejection, disappointment, or losing control, things they instinctively try to avoid. So instead of saying, "I miss you," they keep it inside. They process everything privately. You might cross their mind when they're alone, driving, lying awake at night, or during those quiet moments when distractions fade and emotions start catching up. In those moments, you're no longer someone they can create distance from. You become a feeling they have to sit with. And that can be overwhelming, because when you were present, they had ways to manage closeness. They could pull back, delay, or create space whenever things felt too intense. Now, they don't have that option. Your absence puts them in a position where they can't control the distance in real time. They can't push you away in the moment. They can't adjust the connection to make it more comfortable. They're left alone with their own thoughts, and that creates a kind of internal conflict. One part of them feels the connection, remembers the comfort you brought, and quietly wonders what they lost. Another part immediately tries to shut it all down because it feels too overwhelming to face. That's why thinking about you doesn't always turn into action. For them, missing someone and reaching out are two very different things. Reaching out would mean turning those internal feelings into something real. It would mean admitting they care. It would mean risking how you might respond. And for someone who protects themselves by keeping emotional distance, that step can feel almost impossible. So they stay quiet, they choose distance, they convince themselves that silence is safer than facing what's inside. But remember this, silence doesn't always mean emptiness. Sometimes it means emotions are being handled privately, far away from your view. And that's what hurts the most, because from your perspective, love is shown through actions. It looks like effort, communication, reassurance, and presence. You measure feelings by what someone does, but avoidant people often experience emotions in a different way. They can care deeply and still struggle to express it. They can miss someone and still stay distant. They can think about someone constantly and still remain silent. Not because they don't feel anything, but because showing it feels like a battle they don't know how to win. While you're questioning your value because of their silence, they may be feeling your absence in a way that doesn't look like love on the outside, but inside creates emotions they don't fully understand. This is the part most people never see. From the outside, it might look like they've moved on easily. You see them living their life, laughing, talking, appearing completely unaffected, and that image can hurt deeply because you're sitting with the weight of everything while they seem untouched. But what you see isn't always the full truth. Sometimes what looks like moving on is actually avoidance. Avoidant people don't always process emotions by sitting with them. Instead, they create distance from what they feel. They stay busy. They fill their time. They surround themselves with activity because it keeps them from slowing down enough to feel everything. Distraction feels safer than emotional depth. They might scroll endlessly, not because it matters, but because silence allows emotions to surface. They might stay around people, not because those connections replace you, but because shallow interaction is easier than facing something deeper. They chase routines, noise, and constant movement because it gives them a sense of control. As long as something is happening, they don't have to sit with what's underneath. But eventually, distractions fade, the conversations end, the phone gets put away, the noise quiets down, and in those still moments, you return to their thoughts. Not because they choose it, but because what they've been avoiding finally has space to come back. Sometimes it's subtle, a place that reminds them of you, a song, a pravichka you shared, a random memory that shows up without warning, a feeling they can't fully explain but can't ignore either. They might believe that staying busy will eventually make everything disappear, that if they just keep moving forward, the feelings will fade on their own. But emotions don't work like that. Avoiding something doesn't erase it, it just delays it. And every time the distraction fades, the same emotions can resurface. So they get caught in a cycle, they stay busy and feel temporary relief. Then things slow down and everything comes back. So they look for another distraction to escape again. Over time, the exhaustion isn't just about missing you. It's about constantly trying not to feel what your absence brings up inside them. And that creates something even more complicated. They can start associating you with discomfort, not because you hurt them, but because losing you forced them to face emotions they weren't ready to handle. Instead of moving toward those feelings, their instinct is often to build more distance, more distractions, more walls, anything to stay in control. From your side, it looks simple. It looks like they just don't care. But the truth is often much more complex than that. It can feel like everything you shared meant nothing. From where you stand, their silence can look like indifference, like they've erased you without a second thought. But from their side, it often works differently. What looks like distance can actually be a form of protection. They are not always trying to forget you because you didn't matter. Sometimes they are trying to soften the impact because facing it directly feels too exposed. They are not avoiding you as much as they are avoiding what they felt. What they experienced with you may have affected them more deeply than they expected, and instead of leaning into that, they try to quiet it down. But pushing emotions away only works for so long. Every time that inner resistance weakens, even briefly, they are reminded that what they had with you was not something ordinary. This is why certain connections don't fade easily. It's not because they are constantly thinking about you every second of the day, but because they never truly allowed themselves to understand what the relationship meant. The feelings remain unfinished, unresolved, and anything unresolved has a way of lingering in the background, waiting to be acknowledged. They may never send the message you're hoping for, they may not check in or offer the clarity you want, but that doesn't mean you've disappeared from their awareness. There's a difference between reaching out and quietly keeping track from a distance. Someone can stay silent and still be paying attention. Someone can create space while still feeling the absence of what they lost. For them, distance feels safer than direct emotional confrontation. So instead of expressing what's going on inside, they choose a quieter path. They observe without stepping forward. They notice your life, your actions, the way things change for you. Not always in a way that's obvious, but enough to stay connected in their own controlled way. They might check your updates, scroll through your profile, notice subtle shifts, or quietly stay aware of what's happening with you without ever admitting it. And underneath that quiet observation, there's often a question they don't say out loud. Are you truly gone, or are you still there waiting? No contact introduces something they are not comfortable with: uncertainty. When you were always there, the pattern was predictable. They knew how things worked. They knew they could step back, and you would likely still be there when they returned. That familiarity gave them a sense of control, but when you stop reaching out, that control begins to slip. Instead of certainty, they are left with questions. Instead of knowing how you feel, they have to guess. And for someone who relies on distance to feel safe, uncertainty can be deeply unsettling. So they watch instead of acting. They look for signs without putting themselves in a vulnerable position. They wonder if you've moved on, if you're happier without them, if you still care, or if there's any sign that you're emotionally attached. Every small detail they notice can shape how they interpret the situation. If you seem unaffected, it can confuse them. If you look like you're moving forward, it can trigger a quiet discomfort. If you appear stronger, calmer, and more focused on yourself, it challenges the version of you they thought they understood. And this is where something begins to shift inside them. You are no longer predictable. You are no longer easy to read or assume. And when someone becomes less accessible, they often become more noticeable. That change can spark curiosity. But curiosity doesn't always turn into action. For someone who struggles with emotional vulnerability, acting on those feelings means taking a risk they are not used to taking. When you were present, they could manage the connection in a way that felt safe. They could move closer when it suited them, and pull away when things became intense. They could control how much they revealed and how much distance they created. But your absence removes that control. Now there is no dynamic to adjust, no immediate way to create space or closeness. There is only the reality that you are no longer there in the same way. And that reality forces them to recognize the role you held in their life, not always in a dramatic or obvious way, but through the structure of their everyday life, through shared routines, emotional comfort, and the quiet stability your presence brought. And realizing that someone had that kind of impact can feel uncomfortable, because it challenges something they deeply value, their sense of independence. Instead of immediately accepting that, they often resist it. They try to push those feelings away. They may downplay what happened, focus on what didn't work, or convince themselves that distance is the better choice, not necessarily because it reflects the full truth, but because it feels safer. Accepting how much they felt would require vulnerability. It would mean admitting that someone reached a part of them they couldn't fully control. It would mean acknowledging that the connection mattered and that their usual defenses didn't completely protect them. And for someone who has learned to rely on emotional distance, that realization can feel threatening. So they create a story that keeps them comfortable. They tell themselves they're fine, that they don't need the connection, that maybe it wasn't as meaningful as it seemed. But underneath that narrative, there is often tension. The feelings don't fully disappear just because they are ignored. They stay present in the background, creating a quiet conflict between what they truly feel and what they allow themselves to accept. And that conflict can become exhausting, not because it is resolved, but because it is constantly managed, pushed aside, and avoided whenever it gets too close to the surface. When you were the one reaching out, expressing yourself, and trying to fix things, they may not have fully seen your value, not because you lacked anything, but because your presence felt constant. And for someone with avoidant tendencies, constant availability can feel comfortable rather than urgent. It creates a sense that the connection will always be there, no matter how much distance they create. It allows them to stay in control of how close or far things feel. But the moment you stop chasing, everything begins to shift. When you stop sending messages, stop trying to prove your worth, and stop carrying the responsibility of fixing something they are not ready to face, the pattern changes. You are no longer predictable. You are no longer always within reach. You move from being constantly available to becoming someone they can't automatically access, from someone they could step away from without consequence, to someone whose absence creates something they can't ignore, and that shift creates something powerful, respect, not always spoken or openly shown, but something they begin to feel internally. They start noticing qualities they may have overlooked before: your self-respect, your emotional strength, your ability to set boundaries, and your independence. These qualities leave a different kind of impact because they show stability. They show that you are grounded in yourself. Your silence begins to speak for you. It communicates something without needing words. It shows that you are no longer willing to lose yourself just to keep a connection alive. It communicates something powerful without needing to say a word. It shows that what you felt was genuine, but who you are isn't tied to whether they stay or go. It reflects your ability to step back from something that causes you pain. It proves that you can still care about someone while also choosing yourself. And that creates a different kind of pull, one rooted not just in emotion, but in human nature and perception. Often, people only begin to recognize someone's true value when they realize that person is no longer waiting around for them. But this is also where things can feel confusing. They may never come out and admit what has shifted inside them. You might not hear the words you hoped for, like acknowledgement or respect for how you handled things. And that's not always because they don't feel it. It's often because saying it out loud would require them to confront their own past behavior. Admitting that kind of truth means facing how their actions created distance, how their silence or inconsistency contributed to what was lost. That level of honesty can be uncomfortable, especially for someone who struggles with being emotionally open. So instead, they keep it to themselves. They notice the change in you. They feel that something is different. They recognize that you're no longer showing up in the same way, but they don't express it because doing so would mean lowering the walls they've depended on. As time passes and you maintain your distance, you quietly break a pattern they had grown used to. Before, the dynamic may have been predictable. They pulled away and you moved closer. They went silent and you filled the gaps. They created space and you worked to close it. Without realizing it, you were carrying the emotional weight for both of you. Now that cycle has been disrupted. The familiar rhythm is gone, replaced by uncertainty. They're no longer in a position where everything feels predictable or within their comfort zone. They may not just be sitting back passively. They might be observing, trying to figure out what this change means. They may question whether you'll eventually return to how things used to be, whether you'll break the silence first, or if this time something has truly shifted in you. Because if you go back too soon, everything resets. The old dynamic comes back, and they don't have to reflect, grow, or face anything uncomfortable. It all becomes familiar again, so they stay where they are, waiting, unsure. Not necessarily because they don't care, but because they're trying to understand if this version of you is temporary or real. If you return quickly, they can assume nothing has truly changed. But if you remain steady in your decision, they're faced with something much deeper. The possibility that the dynamic they relied on no longer exists. And this time, they're not in control of how things unfold. They're dealing with a version of you they can't easily predict, a connection that no longer revolves around their comfort. That shift puts them in a position they may have avoided for a long time, the need to look inward. Because when you don't step back into the old cycle, they're left with questions they can't ignore. Why did things change? What role did they play? What feelings did they avoid? What did they lose by not fully showing up? These are not easy questions, and they often come with discomfort. So they may wait, hoping things will go back to how they were. They may hope you'll return and remove the pressure. Familiarity feels safer than change, even when it wasn't fulfilling. But while all of this may be happening on their side, something even more important is happening within you. You begin to change, not because you're trying to influence them, but because you're finally returning to yourself. You've spent so much time analyzing their behavior, trying to make sense of their distance, holding on to something that didn't always give you the same clarity or security you were offering. And eventually, you start to see things differently. You begin to understand that love was never meant to feel like constant confusion. It wasn't supposed to feel like endless waiting or second-guessing your worth. A real connection shouldn't require you to prove yourself over and over or fight for basic emotional presence. That realization changes something inside you, because stepping away was never really about making them miss you or forcing them to understand your absence. At its core, it was about breaking a cycle where you kept choosing someone who couldn't meet you in the same way. It was about remembering that your value doesn't shrink just because someone else couldn't recognize it. Their inability to show up doesn't define what you bring to the table. And while they may be going through their own internal struggles or realizations, your healing can't depend on whether they come to terms with those things. Your growth isn't tied to whether they reach out, apologize, or finally see what they lost. Everything begins to shift when your sense of peace is no longer tied to their actions. When you stop asking if they'll come back and start asking if you're returning to yourself, that's where real strength begins. Because if they do come back, they won't find the same version of you. They won't meet someone who constantly chases, explains, or settles just to keep a connection alive. They'll meet someone who understands their worth, someone who can love deeply but still protect their own peace, someone who knows that a relationship should add to their life, not require them to lose themselves. And if they never come back, it doesn't mean you were left behind. It means you became someone stronger through the process, someone who can walk away from what hurts and still remain whole, someone who can sit in silence without losing their sense of self. Someone who no longer accepts inconsistency, emotional distance, or unclear intentions as the cost of being chosen. The most meaningful transformation doesn't happen when someone else finally sees your value. It happens when you no longer need them to. When you truly understand your own worth, everything shifts, your decisions, your boundaries, the way you show up in relationships, and you begin to attract connections that meet you with the same level of care and effort you bring. If this resonates with you, just know you're not alone in this experience. Many people have faced the pain of loving someone who couldn't meet them emotionally. Many have had to learn how to choose themselves after giving so much to someone else. Growth often starts in the moments that feel the hardest. Keep moving forward, keep rebuilding, keep becoming who you're meant to be. And remember, the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you build with yourself. This journey is not about making someone else realize your worth, but about finally recognizing it within yourself. When you stop chasing validation and start choosing your own peace, you break the cycle that once kept you stuck. Whether they return or not becomes irrelevant because you are no longer the same person who needed them to feel complete. True growth begins when you stand firm in your value and refuse to accept anything that asks you to lose yourself. And that is where real strength, clarity, and lasting fulfillment begin.